The savanna of Velcareth stretched for 1,000 miles in every direction, a red-gold ocean of iron grass under twin suns that burned like copper coins. It was not a place for humans. Every creature on Velcareth had evolved over millions of years to kill, to endure, to dominate. The Shelvari, the great feline predators who ruled this world, stood 9 feet tall at the shoulder, possessed retractable claws that could slice through alloy plating, and moved in coordinated packs that had brought down prey 3 times their own mass. Mara Ellison did not belong here. She knew it. The Shelvari knew it. The Xenobiological Survey team that had left her stranded when the shuttle malfunctioned definitely knew it. She had 48 hours of emergency rations, a field medkit rated for human injuries, a broken communications beacon she was still trying to fix with a multi-tool and sheer stubbornness, and approximately 0 survival training for a Class 6 predator world. What she did have was 11 years of experience as a trauma nurse in the outer colonies, a habit of refusing to panic, and the particular kind of calm that comes from having once held a child's severed artery closed with 2 fingers for 23 minutes while waiting for a surgical drone. She was sitting cross-legged in the dust, trying to resolder the beacon's power coupling, when the cub found her. She heard it before she saw it, a soft, rhythmic sound, somewhere between a whimper and a chirp, very quiet, very deliberate, like something trying to make noise but uncertain whether noise was safe. Mara looked up slowly. A Shelvari cub stood 10 meters away at the edge of the iron grass, watching her with enormous amber eyes. It was maybe 2 months old, small enough to fit in her arms, which meant it was roughly the size of a large Labrador, and its left foreleg was held off the ground, bent at an angle that made Mara's stomach clench with professional reflex. That's a fracture. Possibly a break. Definitely not how that leg is supposed to look. The cub took 1 step toward her. It flinched. It took another step. Mara set down the multi-tool very carefully and held both hands open, palms up. An old gesture. Something she'd learned worked across species lines more often than not. "Hey," she said quietly. "I see you." The cub chirped again and limped closer. It was the bravest thing she had witnessed in 11 years of working with people in crisis, and she had seen humans walk through fire. She was examining the leg, the cub trembling but still, watching her face with those incandescent eyes, when the shadow fell over her. Then another shadow. Then 5 more. Mara did not look up immediately. She had the cub's foreleg cradled in her hands and she was at a critical point of assessment, feeling gently along the bone structure with the pad of her thumb, and she was not going to drop it for anything. When she finally did look up, she found herself surrounded by 7 adult Shelvari in a loose ring, each one the size of a cargo mule, their gaze fixed on her with an attention that felt like physical weight. The largest one stood directly in front of her. A male, scarred across the muzzle and left shoulder, with a dark mane that ran from his skull down between his shoulder blades. His eyes were the color of beaten gold, and they were looking at her with an expression she recognized after a moment. It was the look of someone who has been afraid for a long time and has just found the only person in the building who might know what to do. This, Mara understood later, was Kale Vera, pack leader of the Velcareth Southern Range, sovereign of 40 square miles of the most dangerous territory on the planet, feared by every living thing that moved across this world. He was waiting for her to fix his child. "Okay," Mara said, mostly to herself. "Okay." She opened the field medkit. It was rated for humans, which meant the instruments were calibrated for human bone density, human tissue response, human pain thresholds. None of that was going to apply here. She had splinting materials, analgesic patches, wound sealant, and a handheld bone density scanner that had never been designed to read alien physiology. She ran the scanner anyway. The readings came back nonsense, as expected, but the shape of the nonsense told her something. There was a clear structural disruption mid-shaft on the primary weight-bearing bone. A fracture, not a full break. The bone had cracked but not separated. "That's better than I thought." She looked up at Kale Vera. He hadn't moved. None of them had moved. The cub was still trembling in her lap, but it hadn't tried to pull away, and that small fact felt like a foundation she could build on. "I'm going to splint it," she told him, knowing he couldn't understand her words, trusting that tone carried something. "I need him to stay still. I don't know if you can help with that, but if you can, now would be the time." Kale Vera lowered his head and made a sound, deep, resonant, subsonic, that Mara felt in her sternum more than heard with her ears. The cub went completely still. She worked for 40 minutes. She had no anesthetic appropriate for a Shelvari. She had no instruments sized for this anatomy. She had no reference literature, no senior colleague to consult, no surgical suite, no second pair of hands. What she had was the knowledge, built across 11 years, that a fracture wants to be stabilized, that a frightened patient needs to feel that someone in the room knows exactly what they're doing, and that the most important thing a medical professional can do, sometimes the only thing, is refuse to communicate uncertainty to the patient. She talked the whole time. Calmly, steadily, a low narration of every step, not because the cub understood but because the sound of a focused, unhurried voice was its own kind of medicine. She used her splinting strips, cutting and layering them around the adapted structure she'd improvised from 2 flat pieces of the beacon's casing. She used the wound sealant to secure everything in place. It wasn't designed for this application, but it cured rigid, and rigid was what she needed. She wrapped the whole assembly with the medkit's compression bandaging in a configuration she invented on the spot. When she was done, she sat back on her heels and looked at her work. It wasn't pretty. It was a field repair built from mismatched tools by someone who didn't have the right equipment. But it was solid, and it was stable, and when the cub experimentally pressed the leg to the ground and bore weight on it, cautiously, then with more confidence, it held. The cub looked down at its leg. Then it looked up at Mara. Then it headbutted her directly in the chest hard enough to knock her flat on her back in the red dust. She lay there for a moment, looking up at the twin copper suns, catching her breath. Then she laughed. The sound of a human laughing, genuine, tired, relieved, was apparently something the Shelvari had never encountered, because all 7 adults went very still. Kale Vera tilted his enormous head exactly 45 degrees, the way a confused dog might, which was so incongruous on a 9-foot apex predator that Mara laughed harder. She sat up, brushing dust off herself. The cub climbed into her lap with complete confidence, as though this had always been its designated location. Kale Vera stepped forward. He was close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off his body. He lowered his head until his nose was level with her face. He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he made the same deep subsonic sound he had made earlier, the one that had stilled the cub, but slower now, drawn out. Mara didn't know the language. She would spend the next several years learning it. But she understood this the same way she understood the looks on the faces of family members when she came out of a surgical bay. "Tell me." She held up both hands again, palms up. "He's going to be fine," she said. 6 weeks, maybe 8. Keep him off it. I'll check on him if you'll let me." Kale Vera looked at her hands. He lifted one massive paw and pressed it, with extraordinary gentleness, flat against both her palms. A gesture she'd never seen. A gesture, she realized later, that the Southern Pack used only between equals. The rescue team found her 4 days later. They landed to find Mara Ellison sitting in the middle of a Shelvari Pack encampment, cub asleep across her legs, running her improvised sensor readings through a repair-patched beacon while Kale Vera sat beside her like a very large, very scarred, very attentive colleague. The team lead stood in the shuttle hatchway with his mouth open. "Ellison," he finally said. "What did you do?" Mara looked up from her work. The cub stirred, resettled, and went back to sleep. "My job," she said.